Welcome to part 3 of basic training. Today we're going to cover all of the strategies and shortcuts for Whistlestop Summit on 150cc. This track uses the super high handling combo of Baby Daisy and Mock Rocket and starts off with a ridiculously annoying jump up onto the rails on the left hand side of the track. The trick to getting this consistently is waiting until you get to this spot on the track, and notice how my cart is just barely touching the top of that white brick. You have to jump much earlier than your brain is telling you to. Now, when you get on top of the rail, start holding right so that you can straighten yourself out, which will cause you to automatically grind the left-hand rail. As soon as this happens, do a left trick to get onto the yellow rail. Finally, wait until the rail starts to straighten out and do a right jump at this connecting segment to grind the right-hand rail. All of this stuff is fairly tricky to learn on your first few times through, but grinding the rails in this way makes it so that you're taking lines as inside as possible, which saves quite a bit of time. Now, the most common thing that can go wrong, aside from running face first into the wall, is that you get on top of the train tracks, but you don't start grinding right away. If this happens, don't panic, just grind the left-hand rail, and when it starts to straighten out, jump straight ahead onto the right-hand rail. Now, if you want to see something crazy, here's what the world record does. After some fancy shenanigans to actually get onto the rail, they instead pass this first connector around the bend here and then trick right after they pass it. They then trick off the edge of the train tracks and hold left to do a wall ride right before tricking off of it and basically landing on the platform around the turn, letting them get back onto the rail just like before. When done perfectly, this strategy saves about half a second per lap over going around, but it is very precise, and if you're even slightly early on those tricks, you'll miss the platform entirely. Now, the good news is that if you trick a little bit later, you'll often get more than enough height to get onto the platform, and while this is slower than the world record strategy, it's a lot easier to do and still saves about 0.2 seconds over going around, provided that you do the neutral trick as soon as you get onto the rail. In general, tricking on rails like this allows you to get multiple rail boosts in rapid succession, and you want to do this pretty much any time there's some straightaway on a rail that you're grinding. But do make sure that if you're chaining multiple tricks that you wait until the previous boost has fully run out before doing the next trick, otherwise you'll lose the boost and slow down a little bit. But whatever the case, however you ended up on the right side rail, when it straightens out you want to do one neutral trick to get a mini turbo boost, and then right trick into the fence before getting back onto the rail. If you do it right, your cart will go kind of sideways and make a little sound like this. In the rail section, we're going to grab the coins from the left-hand rails first by waiting until the wooden bridge is about to begin, and then doing a left trick onto the red rail, doing a couple of neutral rail tricks before left tricking onto the gray rail to the far left. Once we get to the yellow rail, we're going to right trick to get off of it. On lap 2, we're going to do pretty much the same thing except on the right-hand side of the track, making sure to left trick once we get to the end rather than right trick. The world record does this ridiculous looking nonsense where they bounce all the way from the inside right rail to the outside right rail and then all the way over to the far left rail. Doing this actually doesn't save any time outright over what we just did, but it does allow them to get an extra coin, which adds up over the course of the run. Now, as is par for the course in these videos so far, there are 4 ways to take the grass cut. If you're really not looking forward to learning the frame perfect shortcut that's coming up, then the simplest thing to do is just to go around the cut and build up a super mini turbo. If you're feeling a bit fancy, you can also start a charge jump after coming off of that rail, and then once you get to the grass, do a left charge jump into the wall. As soon as you stick to the wall, do a right charge jump to move to the other wall, and then as soon as you stick to that wall, do a left charge jump to get off. It's a lot easier than it looks as long as you don't do that first charge jump until you're already in the grass. But honestly, unless you have the luck and timing of the flash and do everything perfectly, it doesn't really save more than a few milliseconds as far as I can tell. Now, if you are going to attempt that frame perfect shortcut that I was foreshadowing earlier, then you're going to just mushroom through the cut instead and widen your line to charge an ultra mini turbo around the hairpin. The world record only charges a mini turbo and then starts a charge jump to totally clear the gap that we just ultra mini turboed around. Now, truth be told, I never managed to actually pull this off in a run, but as far as I can tell, the setup is basically this. You need to take a really wide line when coming out of the shortcut, and then release the mini turbo and start a charge jump. Then, aim your cart for this coin on the right before turning hard left towards the edge of the track, using this light up here as a visual cue for where you want to be moving. Then, it's just a left charge jump followed by a mid-air left trick for course correction to get back onto the track. Now, I'm going to level with you here. This shortcut is very fast, saving about 1.5 seconds per lap over going around, so it's absolutely critical for setting a good time trial time. But it's so ridiculously precise that, like I said, I never managed to get it in a run even once. And the problem is really this gigantic rock on the left. You can see that the world record clips it just a little bit, but if your angle's even slightly off, I'm talking like just a handful of pixels off, you'll instead do one of those weird fence clip animations off of the rock and run face first into the wall. And because of how precise this shortcut is, there's basically no chance that you'll ever be able to actually execute this online. However, if you have a feather, then it's basically free, so do keep that in mind. Now, fortunately, we're almost done with the end of this nightmare of a track, and all we have to talk about is the ending. Unfortunately, we have yet another really precise shortcut coming up. Do whatever you can with the rails on the right, and then once you get to the yellow rail, jump on top of it. Once you get back in line with the right-hand railroad rail, jump straight to get onto it, and then right trick off of it to jump onto this yellow rail below. This can be a bit tricky to learn, but you have a lot of control over how your cart moves in midair, both from just holding the joystick and from doing midair course correction tricks. So the setup there isn't really that precise. But now, we have this. Now, this shortcut is a bit easier than the gap jump that we just covered because it does have a fairly consistent setup, but that setup is very hard to learn, and it's still difficult to execute even once you've learned it. Basically, once you get onto the gray rail from the yellow rail, count 3 of these yellow dividing segments. Then, either just before you get to the 3rd segment or right when you get to it, do a left trick off of the rail and do one more midair course correction trick to the left to start riding the wall. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second because most of the guides that I've seen online will tell you that you need to trick when you get to the top of the wall or when you get to this little segment right below the top of the wall. But here's the thing. Using the wall itself as a visual cue can be consistent provided that you trick off the rail at the same spot every time, but I found that if my timing was even slightly off, I was not able to consistently get the cut. And to see why, let's just take a look at the shortcuts for my current personal best. If you compare my lap 1 and lap 2 shortcuts, you can see that on lap 2, I tricked off the gray rail just a frame later than I did on lap 1, which meant that I had the trick slightly higher off the wall on lap 2 to do the cut properly. Now, am I really just processing the frame that I tricked off the gray rail and then modifying my trick timing off of the wall in real time? Well, no. In fact, I'm actually not paying attention to my cart or the wall at all. Instead, what I'm doing is looking at this S on the safety sign. And specifically what I'm trying to do is time my trick off of the wall so that when I do this wall ride off the sign, I'm connecting with this spot right outside the corner of the S. Getting the timing down is going to require a lot of practice, and it is honestly a little bit vibe based, but I promise you that at least for me, this was a much better visual cue than anything else I could find, and I was able to get my consistency up to about 75 to 80% when I was really grinding the track out. However, if you're still struggling with the cut after watching this video, I'll link to a video by Shortcat that explains how to use the wall as a visual cue. Now, thankfully, if you can get onto this rail here, the rest of the strategy is fairly straightforward. You just right trick into the wall to start a wall ride, and then as soon as that happens, you left trick to get onto the final rail. What I do is ride it all the way around before left tricking at this little bend in the rail to get back onto the track. The world record does one more little trick beforehand, but there is a Lakitu zone around the corner here, so you're going to want to be careful if you're trying that, since it doesn't save that much time. Now, if you're not trying to waste 8 hours of your life learning the strategy like I did, what you can do after getting onto the yellow rail is instead count 4 of the yellow dividers and then left trick directly onto the top of the rail above the wall. Just before the rail straightens out, jump off of it and then trick off the edge of the platform before doing a right drift and shrooming through the off-road. This strategy is a lot easier, but there are some pretty serious drawbacks. The most obvious is that it's much slower in comparison to my current personal best. In fact, it's so much slower than what I do in my personal best that even if I didn't use mushrooms at all, it would still be faster than what we're doing now. However, if you're just trying to get good for online play, one major benefit to not taking the cut is that going on the rails and the main track gives you a lot more opportunities to get items, which can be an absolute game changer if you're finding yourself in the back online. Thankfully, we are finally done with all the strats, and we can talk a little bit more about the track itself while checking out my current personal best. And as always, if you found this video helpful, please drop a like and a comment so that it can get spread to more people, because it really helps me out, and thank you for that. It is always very much appreciated. So, Whistlestop Summit. Honestly, it was a real slog putting this video together, not because I found the track boring or frustrating to time trial, quite the opposite actually. For a long time, this was one of my favorite tracks in the game. My opinion has soured a bit over the past month or so, mostly because as I've gotten through more of the tracks, I've started to feel like there are so many of them that are only difficult because they expect you to constantly be nailing pixel perfect and frame perfect strategies one after the other. It's a big problem for me because, for one, I much prefer difficulty that's a test of your driving ability like a lot of the tracks in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and for two, what it means is that you basically can't ever do any of the interesting stuff online, like, ever. The starting rail jump is literally impossible if you start on the right-hand side of the track, and even if you manage to get onto the rail, it's very easy to get bumped off because of how the game handles collisions between players who are grinding together, and I probably could have worded that better. But as you could probably imagine, this also means that the ending shortcut is basically not doable at all, especially on laps 2 and 3 when people just love to drop bananas all over the rail. And when you take away these strategies, what you're left with is a track that's literally on rails for 90% of it. Now, don't get me wrong, Whistlestop does take rails and make them about as interesting as they can be, but it's just unfortunate that becoming a high-level time trialer on this track doesn't really translate all that well into victories online. A big part of my motivation for hopping into time trials at all is to get good enough at a track so that my driving ability can offset the chaos of Mario Kart World's item system, at least a little bit. But with Whistlestop Summit, that's just not really a thing for the most part, and it's unfortunate because, like I said, there really are a lot of things to love about Whistlestop Summit, but it just sucks that you only get that experience when you're playing with yourself. And I probably could have worded that better as well.